We are picking up where we were last week in the middle of Perek Zion, and we've been describing the various large utensils that were created for the Beit HaMikdash of Shlomo. We talked about the Bechonot, which were the portable water basins. We talked about the Yam Shel Shlomo. We've also talked about the giant kruvim that were there. We talked about the Yachin and Boaz, the two major columns that stood in front of the entrance of the Ulam, the lobby or the entryway into the major building of the Beit HaMikdash itself. And now we're going to be dealing with some of the smaller items and how everything comes together. And that's where Pasuk Mem picks up. But there's some interesting pieces along the way that we'll have a chance to talk about. Pasuk Mem says, "Vayas chirom et ha-kirot ve'et ha-ya'im ve'et ha-mizrakot." And Chirom went ahead and he made all of these smaller articles. Now the articles, the kirot, are some kind of pails or some kind of containers. And the purpose of these containers were simply one of two possibilities. We really don't know for sure. It is either to remove the mass amount of ashes from the top of the Mizbeach, or it is for the purposes of cooking the korbanot that were needed. Both of those are possibilities. There are bases to say on each base stamp psukim. The ya'im are shovels, and the shovels or scrapers, depending on translations you'll use, they were a kind of a shovel that again was used for the purpose of removing ash itself. And mizrakot are those utensils that are used for zrikat hadam, for the sprinkling of blood, which was part of the korban process. Interestingly, Chanoch Albach, in his commentary to the Mishnayot and Psochim, the fifth Perek, the fifth Mishnah, says that based on Chazal, these were not normal kinds of containers, because one of the concerns we had when it came to the collection of dam is that the blood was not allowed to congeal. And so as a result, he suggests that the way these were constructed, Chazal talk about the fact that there weren't high walls to it. So it wasn't like a pot which you put on top of the stove kind of construction, but rather he said they were either there were some kind of bowls, and these bowls either had a pointed bottom or a rounded bottom, like a ball. And the reason for that is because you never wanted to have the mizrakot put down and forgotten about. Because this way, if they weren't forgotten about, you'd make sure you do the zrikat hadam, the sprinkling of the blood, in a timely fashion before there was any kind of problem with the issue of them congealing. And he did this by Hiram la'asot et kol ha'melacha asher asa lamelech Shlomo Beit Hashem. And Hiram finished all of the work. Interestingly, the way it's presented here was that these smaller articles were actually made at the end. However, if you look back in Divrei, or look ahead in Divrei Hayomim, and it's Divrei Hayomim Bet, Perek Bet, Pasuk Yud Gimel, it seems to suggest that these things were actually done in advance. And in fact, there is a suggestion among the Meforshim, for example, the Malbim says this, that what happened was Hiram had all of these articles that were brought. Now, his expertise was in copper work. His father was also an expert artisan, as you recall. And in his father's role, his father may have helped prepare these articles in advance, and Hiram finished them off at the end of the building of the Beit HaMikdash itself. So we're really not sure the exact time frame. The way it's presented here, it was at the end. The way it's presented in Divrei Yomim, it suggests it's at the beginning. Pasuk Mem Aleph. Mem Aleph says, Amudim Shnayim. Yeah, I'm sorry. Ira.
Quick question. What happened to the kalim from the Mishkan?
My question.
Yeah. So interestingly, the kalim from the Mishkan, they may have not been around anymore. We don't know for sure if they were still around. We know that, for example, from the Mishkan, we have, for instance, the Mizbeach, we didn't use from the Mishkan. The new Mizbeach that was built was massive. There was a machloket, which I mentioned, I think 2 weeks ago, when it came to the Mizbeach HaKtoret, even the golden altar, whether or not it was new or not, and those things from the Mishkan were put in Geniza. There is an opinion that those things, the Groth takes the position that actually the Mizbeach HaZahav, that incense altar that was inside the building, was constructed over the previous one. The one in the Mishkan was small, okay? And the new one was 1 Amah addition in every direction. So it became 3 Amah versus 3 by 3 Amah versus the 1 Amah by 1 Amah. It's entirely possible that those Kalim were either lost at some point, lost, I mean, captured or taken. Remember, there were all these different kinds of battles. It's possible that they were put into the, into Geniza. And also, if you remember, everything that went into this Beit HaMikdash was grander than things have been before, except for a few key kelim, the Shulchan, the Menorah, and the Aron. Those were the grand kinds of things that were made out of gold. So we're not sure, but those are possibilities of what happened to them. Going back to Posuk Mem Aleph, and please, you don't have to raise hands, you can just yell it out.
Thank you again.
Okay. Amudim Shnaim, so there were the Yachinu Boaz, now we're being put in place. This is the end of the process. Vigulot HaKotarot Asher al Rosh Amudim Shnaim, and the capitals at the top of these two pillars were placed in position. V'hashvachot shtaim lechasot et shtei gulot hakotarot. And also, if you remember, whether it was, and we talked about this last week, whether it was some kind of netting that came down from the top, almost like cascading from the top of the capital, or whether they were permanent pieces that were around the seam, that the capital was made out of two pieces that were put together, but those were in place. Asher al Rosh Amudim. Ve'et harimonim arba ma'ot l'shtei hashvachot. Remember, these, with the nets, there were 400 of these pomegranate-shaped pieces, which were ornamentation again in the capital. Shnei turim rimonim l'shvacha achat, and there was, each row had one set of pomegranates. There were 2 rows on each one of the capitals, altogether 4 rows. So there was 200 of the rimonim, of the images of rimonim on the top of each of the capitals, the chasot, the shtei gulot hakotarot, asher al pnei amudim, to cover them over. So you have the shvachot, which are more likely some kind of netting design or something cascading from down. And then you also have around it the rimonim. And where the rimonim were, we saw in the past, last week, we saw the different shitot of exactly how they were placed. We don't know. There was a machloket chazal, and we look forward to the third Beit HaMikdash, B'mei Rabbi Abeno, that we will be told by Eliyahu how they should be constructed. Veta mechonot aser, and also the 10 portable basins that were there. Veta kirot aser ala mechonot, and you had the 10 actual bowls filled with the water. That amount of water that was in each one of those were generally about the amount of water that would take, if you recall from last week, it talked about that arba'im bat, that each one of them held 40 bat, which is about the size of 3 mikvahs. Now, it's not 3 mikvahs that we go into, but think about the kelim mikvah if you want to get an idea of how much water it would hold. The kelim mikvah is a basic amount of size of a mikvah itself. Vet hayam ha'achad, and the Yam Shel Shlomo, that massive water basin, which was, according to some opinions, connected to a natural spring and could be used as a regular mikvah for the purposes of washing hands and feet. Ve'tabakar shneim asar tachat hayam, and the 12 oxen that were under the supporting the base of this Yam Shel Shlomo. Ve'et ha-sirot, ve'et ha-ya'im, ve'et ha-mizrakot, ve'et kol ha-kelim, ha'ele asher asach hiram l'melech Shlomo Beit Hashem nechoshet memorat. And all of the pails or the buckets, and all of the shovels, and all of the other utensils, all of these, which Hiram made for Shlomo, for the Beit HaMikdash, was made out of the finest of the copper. It was the purest copper that was possible. Interestingly, the question is, why is this pasuk repeated? Because if you remember where we started, pasuk Mem seems very much like pasuk Mem Hey. What was the point of it? And so there is a suggestion based on the Radak. Well, the Radak suggests, if you notice in the middle of the pasuk, there's a kriyuch tiv. there is a word which looks like ha'ohel, and the way it's read, the Kri is ha'ele. The Radak says, and this is actually based on a Targum Yonatan on this pasuk, that these were all, in the sense, okay, made just like the ones from the Ohel. What is the Ohel? The Ohel Moed. So these were replicas in some way of the ones from the Mishkan themselves. And that, according to the Radak, is what's understood within the Kriyach Tiv. The Targum Yonatan says it explicitly that that's the terminology. He says, Vayat kol manaya, and all of the utensils, mana is a utensil, ha'elain, these, ke'ovad manei mishkana davad Moshe, were made just like the utensils of the Beit HaMikdash, of the Mishkan that Moshe had made. Kein avad chiram lemalka Shlomo Beit Mikdash da Hashem. So too did he go ahead and he make these same utensils for the Beit HaMikdash itself. So it's interesting. Yeah, Yafa.
Yeah, so it's to me, it's just interesting. I never noticed this before, I think, is that it's, if you're going to equate that statement like Moshe, like for Moshe, like the Targum is saying, it's ki'ilu equating Shlomo HaMelech, at least in this endeavor, with Moshe Rabbeinu.
I'm not sure if it's equating Shlomo to Moshe as it is, as much as it is equating the Kedusha of what we understood was in the Mishkan to the Kedusha of what we now understand is in the Beit HaMikdash.
Right, but that Kedusha emanates from the message to Moshe Rabbeinu. I'm guessing there's a message to Moshe Rabbeinu about how to make the Mishkan. There's a message to Shlomo HaMelech how to make the Beis HaMikdash and the Kalim. And therefore, Hiram, he's doing it for Shlomo HaMelech, but Shlomo HaMelech is the boss.
Right, well, that's true. That's all the same. No, we're going to talk about Vayash Shlomo. Shlomo makes the Beit HaMikdash, just like we say Vayash Moshe. Vayachal Moshe. Moshe finished making the Mishkan, and neither of them did all of the artistry. Obviously, there were people involved in building it. So there is a lot of parallels. I'm not suggesting that the parallel of Shlomo to Moshe is an absolute parallel. I'm just saying.
Not absolute, but in this endeavor.
In this endeavor, yeah, that would be true. That both of them served in a role of supervisors, overseers. Both of them made sure that what God wanted was fulfilled. All of that's 100% true. And but what I think what the Targum is saying more is the Targum is just identifying that these are like those. I'm not sure, there's too much to go into it, but I hear what you're saying. Bechikar HaYarden Yitzakam HaMelech B'ma'eva Adama Ben Sukkot Uven Tzaratan. So I sent you, later last night, I sent you a map, and I'm just going to go over to that map for a moment just to make sure we understand what's going on. This is the map. And where this was created, if you notice, is right here in this area. Give me just one moment. Sorry, give me one moment. Is in the area that's between Tzaratan and Sukkot. Okay, right here in this space, according to the Dat Mikra, is where we're talking about that these Kalim were fashioned. Now, interestingly, it talks about these Kalim. These Kalim being the Sirot and the Yaim and the Mizrakot and Kol HaKelim Ha'ela, all of these utensils. What it doesn't include in that list is obviously it doesn't include the Yam Shel Shlomo, and it doesn't include the menorah, and it doesn't, well, actually, let me just say, it doesn't include the Yam Shel Shlomo, and it doesn't include the Mechonot, which were also made out of copper. So there is, the Malbim says, that really what happened was, we have two different kinds of copper that's being used in the Beit HaMikdash. The finest of copper for these small, portable, handheld, utensils, that was the finest of copper, what we called Nechoshet Memorat. However, when it came to the Mechonot, and when it came to the Yam Shel Shlomo, that was a different kind of copper, And that wasn't fashioned in this valley on the other side of the Jordan. Rather, that was done in Yerushalayim closer by. The way it was fashioned, if you notice, that Yatzakam Hamelech b'ma'eva ha'adama. They created forms or molds for these utensils within the ground, and they poured it into the mold within the ground. Now, some of the Meforshim talk about the fact that the reason they did this is they didn't want to go ahead and create classic kind of molds. We imagine out of plaster, whatever utensils, whatever kind of material they would use to make molds, they didn't want to do it. And the reason is that it would not be proper to have those molds still staying around, because you can't necessarily destroy them when they're in the process of making kelim for the Beit HaMikdash. So this was a way. The reality is now archaeologists have seen that this was the way that they used to do these kind of kelim. Within this kind of soil itself, they would make the mold and then they would move on. Vayanach Shlomo et kol hakelim merov ma'od ma'od lo nechkar mishkal hanachoshet. And fascinatingly, the amount of things that he had, there was so much. Shlomo didn't even bother measuring it. He didn't bother weighing it. He didn't bother giving its value. He didn't take it to the appraiser and get an appraisal put up. But rather, Shlomo HaMelech just kept on going and did as much as that was possible to do. Vayas Shlomo et kol hakelim asher beit Hashem, and Shlomo made all of the kelim et mizbach hazahav et hashulchan et alav lechem hapanim zahav. And also he built as well the Mizbeach HaZahav, we talked about that earlier, and also the Shulchan, which had the Lechem HaPanim that was placed on it. Now, interestingly, if you notice, this is Lechem HaPanim, there is a Shulchan. However, when you look in Divrei Hayamim talks about, and this is Divrei Hayamim Bet, Perek Daled, Pasuk Chet, talks about 10 shulchanot that were actually constructed for the Beit HaMikdash. And the reason the Malbim says that while there were 10, there were actually 11 shulchanot, there was one, he says, if you notice, Asher Alav Lechem HaPanim Zav, that there was only one that had the Lechem HaPanim placed on it. The other 10 were ornamental. This is a machloket that exists in the Gemara. The Gemara Menachos and Daf Tzadi Chet Amud Bet, Tzadi Tet Amud Aleph has this machloket of what was the purpose of these extra 10, were they actually used? And also in the next pasuk, which has Ved Menorot Chamesh Miyamin v'Chamesh Mismol Lifnei Hadavir Zahav Sagur. And also the question of the menorah. Because here, and also in Divrei Yamim, it talks about the fact that there wasn't just one menorah, there were 11 menorahs. And those 11 menorahs that stood, there was, the main menorah was in front of, there was a little bit more, the way normally we try to imagine it, is if you look at what was inside the Heichal, you had the 11 menorahs on the left side, which is the south. You had 11 shulchanot on the north side, which is, I'm sorry, I'm just trying, I want to make sure I get my directions correctly. I'm sorry, the south, east is this way. The north, I'm sorry, is where the menorah was. The south is where the shulchanot were. There were 11 on that. In the middle, a little bit towards the front of that room, was the Mizbeach HaKetoret, the golden altar. Most imagine that the way it worked was there was some kind of separation. Maybe the main menorah and the main shulchan were a little bit more towards the center of the room itself, as opposed to being in a straight line where you just had one in the middle. But we don't know this for sure. We don't know exactly what it's going to be and exactly how it was done. We do know there were extras. And the Gemara there talks about the fact, how did they deal with it? So there's a machloket, and the machloket basically says one position is they only used the one shulchan, the rest were ornamental. They only used really one menorah for the classic description, okay, which was again that one menorah For the classic was, the way the Kohen did it and all of the avoda. The others were lit, but not with the same with the obligations. That's one approach. The other approach is no. Actually, they took turns. That the lechem hapanim was offered in rotation over those 11 shulchanot, and when it came to the menorot, all of the menorot were lit in an appropriate fashion. So we're really not sure what happened, but we do know that there was this grandeur that was associated with this new event, with this new place, and that allowed for a multiple of all of those kelim. And they were made out of zahav sagur. Zahav sagur is the finest of gold. Va'perach va'hanerot va'milkachayim zahav. And also the ornamentation, the flowers, and also the milkachayim. There's a machloket exactly what milkachayim was. The simplest explanation is according to Rashi, which says these were like tongs that lifted the wicks into place. They were also all made out of gold. Now, I want to take a little bit. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is the concept of the lechem hapanim? What's that all about?
Lechem hapanim was a bread that was offered every Shabbos. There was a bread that was put out it was called the show bread. It was put out on the table, and there were 12 loaves of bread that were put. There is again a machloket exactly why it's called lechem hapanim, the bread of the faces or the sides. And according to some opinion, there's a wonderful machloket how they were fashioned, but one of the suggestions, the most common suggestion is, and I'm just going to draw it very roughly, is that each loaf looked like this. In other words, it had the multiple sides to it. There is another opinion that suggests that the breads actually were constructed more like this, but they were breads that were put on the shulchan. Those breads that were put onto the shulchan, what then happened was that they were there for the entire week. When they were removed, they were still, the miracle of the lechem hapanim was that they were removed and they were still warm and still fresh, and they were distributed among the Kohanim to be able to have. But the way they put them on is the table always had the bread on it. So when they would put on a new loaf, they basically used the new loaf to push the old loaf off of the shelf, within the table itself. In terms of its design, I think I shared with you a picture, but let me just see if I can find a quick picture for you. Just one moment. Okay, so this is, okay, here it is. I'll take 1 second. I'll have it. I'm sorry, give me 1 second. I'm sorry. It'll take me another moment. This is a picture of the shulchan. It's actually from that famous book, The Tabernacle. There was a reconstruction. If you notice, there are shelves that are along both sides. There are 2 sets of shelves which have six spaces for the breads, and they were put in, and this is the way we suggest the way the shulchan was. The feet, this is the outer portion which had the fancy decoration around it. There was on the base, there was some frankincense that was put in small cups. It was part of the process as well of offering of the lechem hapanim. So it was something that we had from the time of the Mishkan, and we continued having it through the time of the second Beit HaMikdash. I hope that answers.
Sort of, yeah, it's good.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I did want to take just a side note for a moment and go back with you and just talk about one other item, and that's the question of the menorah itself. And the reason I wanted to talk briefly about the menorah is because there's just a fascinating issue that's associated with the menorah. I sent these out to you last night, but just to share with you, the picture on the left is actually a manuscript from Oxford. It's in the Oxford Library. It is a manuscript in the handwriting of the Rambam. This is the Rambam's own Perush HaMishnayot. And in the Perush HaMishnayot, what he writes, and again, this is a translation, into Hebrew, but he writes, "V'ani mitzayer achshav hatzura azot," and I'm going to draw for you now a drawing. This is a drawing that he did. Shagviim tzurat davar mishulash. I'm going to talk about these cups, the vi'im that were part of the decoration. I'm going to use them as I'm going to use a triangle to represent them. Va'kaftor, and these buttons, agula, they're going to be round balls. Va'perach chatzi agula, and the flower I'm going to, show as a half of a ball, half a circle. Kadeshi akal lihitzayer, so I can draw it a little easier. She'ena kavana b'tzurat hazot lodia b'tzurat hagviya amatato. I'm not trying to show you what they really looked like. Lefi shekvar bi'arti oto lecha, because I already explained what they looked like. Aval kavana lodia b'mispar hagviyim v'kaftarim v'prachim uve'mekomotam. But rather, my whole purpose is just to show you the numbers and where they were placed. And also, you'll notice from the base, the stand of the menorah, where there wasn't anything. And also to talk about where the flowers were and where the balls were, and basically to show you how they were. Now, there's a couple of interesting points on this drawing. And if you'll notice it, first of all, this is a drawing of a menorah. The menorah has, as you see, three branches coming out on each side, one branch in the middle. The three branches, the way the Rambam draws them, are straight, coming straight out. And also at the base of it, if you notice, there are three fisalach, which I think is the official term for them. Okay, that there are 3 feet that are at the bottom, the base of the menorah. That's step 1. Step 2 is also, if you look at Rashi. Rashi in Shmot says, okay, look, that quoting the Pasuk, okay, the Yotzim Mitzidah, that you have the branches of the menorah coming out from the sides, Lakan Lakan Balachson. They were coming on a diagonal. Nimshachim Volim Ad Keneged Govham. And they went up, and these diagonal poles or branches went up until they were all the same height. Okay, and each of them came out from the central stem of the candelabrum. The bottom ones obviously were longer than the higher ones. In fact, the highest one, the number 1 that was closest to the top, that was the shortest of all. Because the height of all these branches were the same height as the middle branch, from which go out the other 6 branches. Now, based on this Rashi, and based on this Rambam, is the reason when you go and you'll see menorahs, especially among Chabad, the late Lubavitcher Rebbe, number 7, Zatzal, he was very clear, and his opinion was very strongly that what the Rambam drew and what Rashi described was the structure of the menorah. In other words, they were these straight branches that were coming straight out on a diagonal, as Rashi describes as the Rambam drew. He took that literally. And that was the opinion, and that's why, for example, when you go around Hanukkah time, you'll see all the Lubavitcher menorahs are constructed like this. They're not constructed like we normally imagine with the rounded sides of it. That's his position. But it wasn't just his position. It's the way, it seems it's the pshat of Rashi, and it sure looks like what the Rambam says. Interestingly, what the Rambam says, however, is he also qualifies it, and he says, he's saying, I'm not really drawing, okay? Etc. He says, I'm not really making a precise drawing. I'm just giving you a drawing that you'll be able to understand how things were. Based on that, we also have the other opinions that we're talking about the rounded branches, like we're familiar with. And in fact, if you look in almost all of the drawings of the Beit HaMikdash that you'll find in various sources, they'll always show a menorah very much like the menorah you see today when you're in the Old City. There is that beautiful menorah, the golden menorah that was built by Mechon HaMikdash. that is on the steps on the way down to the Kotel, which also is very similar to the menorah that is part of the symbol of the state of Israel itself, the menorah that's outside of the Knesset. Now, what's the real menorah? So the reality is, based on archaeology, we're pretty convinced that the menorah that was in the Beit HaMikdash was rounded. And there are a number of different sources for it. I just give you three sources. The most famous, obviously, is the Arch of Titus. Now, for those of you who've been to Rome and seen the Arch of Titus, it's not that big. You know, I remember when I saw it not a few years back, I was taken by the fact that it's big, but it's not. I always imagined like something really like, you know, like the Arc de Triomphe. It's much smaller than that. But when you look in the kelim that they're taking out of the Beit HaMikdash, you'll see that there is this menorah. And that is a contemporary view. You know, this is really a contemporary picture of it. It was constructed before they came, because the way they used to proceed with this was a triumphal march when they're marching back. And so there are some who want to say, well, that's a really nice picture, but the person who actually did the carving didn't know the real menorah because he had to have it ready for the time they came back to Rome for the ceremonial march through the Arch of Titus. If you want to have a very interesting, I watched it last night, there's a Khan Academy lesson about the Arch of Titus, which you can learn about the history as well about it, which is fascinating. But here is one of the sources. The other reason why some people say this isn't real is because if you look at the bottom, you have this base, and this base is very strange, because what that base does is that base has pictures of dragons and nymphs and all sorts of other designs that just doesn't make sense that it would be within the Beit HaMikdash. And so some say, really nice, no proof whatsoever, and I'm sorry, it doesn't work. There are explanations, by the way, for the base. I've seen two of them. Daniel Sperber suggests that, Professor Sperber suggests that really what must have happened was in the time of Herod, when idolatry was rampant and the Beit HaMikdash was defiled, that they may have refashioned the base of the menorah by putting something over it that followed classic Roman design with the Roman icons on them as well. I did see somewhere else, and I was trying to find it last night, and I couldn't find it, which talked about that may have been like a carrying case that they used, that they put the inside of they put the base of the menorah, which has the three legs on it, they put it inside that and to be able to carry it easier. Whichever it is, the fact of this base is not the only sort. The fact of this base does not say that it can't be the real menorah, and the reason for that is, and just to go to the other pictures on the sheet I had handed to you, or I had sent to you, is to the left here is a coin. This is a coin from the time of Matityahu Antigonus, who was 37 BCE. He was the last of the Hasmonean dynasty. And you'll see on the coin that he minted was a menorah that was with rounded sides. And also, if you ever visit the excavations underneath Yeshivat HaKotel, which was the place of the Kohanim, we know these are the priestly homes, that we have a mosaic floor, which also has these same rounded menorahs. And there have been other archaeological finds as well, even Roman glass in Rome from the time of Churban Bayit, after Churban Bayit, which even have depictions of the menorah as being rounded. And so while there is a machloket among Gedolim about how it looked, archaeologists today are pretty much convinced that it is the rounded menorah that we're more familiar as a symbol. The unusual thing, by the way, of that rounded menorah is also when you think about the fact of the symbol that the state of Israel came up with the menorah itself. And just to give you a quick picture of it, just in case you don't, for some reason you don't remember it. Let me just pull it up for a second. in this menorah, if you notice, the menorah from the state of Israel, it is actually the same menorah that you find on the Arch of Titus design. Now, the problem with that is the Arch of Titus design incorporates pagan icons in the base. This is not the way the menorah looked in the Beit HaMikdash, except perhaps during Herdis's time, but up until Matityahu and Antigonus, we knew it wasn't the case, that it was a three-legged menorah. And in fact, when Israel came up with the proposal to use this as the emblem, and after it was passed, Rav Herzog, who at the time was the chief rabbi of Israel, was furious. He said, of all symbols you're going to take, I understand you want to take the symbol of the menorah that was from the Arch of Titus and say that we're back again, but to do one that was not the symbol of the menorah in the Beit HaMikdash as we understood it because of the base of it is totally wrong. But it's a side issue, but it's a fascinating issue that we had a little bit extra time today. I felt I wanted to deal with. So to go back again and to remind you where I had left off just a moment ago, when you're imagining the room which had the anteroom or the Kodesh, which was also referred to as the Hechal in our Sefer, that the first room was the lobby, then came the Hechal. When you're imagining the Hechal, a person would walk in, the Kohen would walk in, smack dab in the middle was the golden altar, which was 3 amot by 3 amot. On the left side, he would see all the menorahs. On the right side, he would see all of the shulchanot. And it was this amazing appearance of all of these things that were taking place. Everything had this magnificent wood paneling that was then covered with gold. And Pasuk Nun continues, Vahasipot, Vahamizamrot, Vahamizrakot, Vahakapot, Vahamachtot, Zahav Sagur. And the following items were all made out of pure gold. The first thing is the sipot. The sipot, according to the Mitzudot and according to many others, these were, again, some kind of basin that was used. And there's a number of different ways they could be used. Rashi, however, says, based actually on the next pasuk, the Mizamrot, Rashi says this is a type, sipot is a type of musical instrument that they had. The Mizamrot seems to be, again, to be a musical instrument, the word zemer. However, it's also possible that if you're following the approach of, for instance, the Mitzudot and others, the Mizamrot may not be a musical instrument, but rather it may be something that was some kind of tong that was used, or even like a scissors, to prepare the wicks themselves. The mizrakot, again, these are utensils that are used for sprinkling blood. Kapot are for the frankincense that was held under the showbread, under the lechem hapanim on the shulchan. V'machtot, and also the shovels, zahav sagur. The pans were all made out of pure gold. V'hapotot ledaltot habayit hapnimi lekodesh hakodeshim ledaltei habayit leechal zahav. And also the potot. Now, the potot which were used for the doors, okay, the bayit, the kodesh hakodeshim, ledaltei habayit leechal zahav, all the potot which were used for the doors within the building of the Beit HaMikdash. Now, what are potot? Rashi says very simply, these are keys to open the doors. The Rambam actually says, no, that what this was is these are the kind of hinges that were made. A hinge in those cases were like a cup and a ball that allowed these doors to move, in which case this is the hardware of the door was made out of pure gold. We're not really sure what it is, but we do know that there's a lot of gold there. And then we have the very last pasuk, Vatishlam kol hamelacha asher hasa melech Shlomo beit Hashem. Shlomo finished everything. Vayaveh Shlomo et kodshei David aviv et hakesef et hazahav et hakelim natan ba'otzrot beit Hashem. And Shlomo then brought everything that his father had, and he brought all of those things, and he brought them and he put them in the treasury of the Beit HaMikdash. Now, we dealt with this last week, we dealt with this, and one of the things, was that Shlomo did not specifically use what David HaMelech had prepared. There is a Rashi and also the Radak quote from a Medrash. The Medrash says that there were one of two possible reasons why he didn't use David HaMelech's things. Now, David HaMelech made them because he wanted to have a part in the Beit HaMikdash. And it would seem to be that Shlomo, being a faithful son, would have wanted provided for his father that opportunity. Nevertheless, Shlomo was concerned of one of two things. The one I had mentioned last week was the fact that during David HaMelech's reign, at the end of his reign, there was this terrible famine that was in Eretz Yisrael for 3 years. At the very same time as the famine, David was amassing all of these utensils and all of the materials for these utensils. And so as a result of it, Shlomo felt that he couldn't use them. These utensils were ill-gotten in a certain way because David HaMelech should have used them to provide for the people during the time of famine. The other explanation, which is the first explanation offered, was that Shlomo was concerned. He knew this Beit HaMikdash wasn't going to last forever as much as he wanted it. And he never wanted to have a situation where a conquering army would come, would take the kelim and say, these were stolen from us. Because David HaMelech's gains were all military gains. And so obviously all the things he had the possibility of having come from another nation, another people, where they had been taken. And so both of these are possibilities of why he didn't use it. But at the very same time, what's fascinating is if you remember back at the beginning of the Perek, when we first started it, we began with this idea of Shlomo building, right? We end with the Shlomo building. There's a certain piece at both sides of it. And on the other hand, which is very telling, is we also mention the fact that Shlomo used utensils that David HaMelech had and that he had gotten. In this way, we're providing this kind of closure for David HaMelech as well. There's one last thing Rivka.
Just a quick question. Pure gold is very soft.
Right.
Did anybody talk about how all these things could have been made of pure gold and held up?
I haven't
all these years.
I've thought of the same question as well. I haven't seen it, and there must be the pure gold must not have been 24 karat in the sense that it was that soft, or somehow they knew how to construct it. Most of the things were covered with gold, if you remember, but these other utensils were things that they said were the actual gold itself. So I don't have a good answer for you. I apologize on that.
Thank you.
But it's a great question. Okay. Anything else before one last thing which I want to deal with, and I'm hoping I printed it for you last week. I just want to see if I did it or not. And if not, I'm just going to do it outside. Give me one more moment. Did it. Okay. There is another question, and the other question that exists is how could Shlomo HaMelech have actually made these extra shulchanot and the extra menorot? Everything else he did was architectural and design. Everything else makes sense that he did. But on the other hand, what happened to the idea of Baal Tosif? Baal Tosif is a mitzvah or a commandment that we're not allowed to add. So, you can have 4 tzitzis on a garment. You can't have 5 tzitzis on a garment. You can have, the 4 species of a lulav and etrog. But if you really like roses, you just can't put it in a lulav. Tough. It's a Baal Tosif issue. You're not allowed to do it. So there is a medrash, the Medrash HaGadol. The Medrash HaGadol is a fascinating medrash that was found in the late 19th century, early 20th century. We really didn't have a copy of it until actually Mosada Rav Kook put it out. But the Medrash HaGadol, and the Medrash HaGadol talks about it in Sefer Shmot. And he writes as follows. Moshe asa shulchan echad, Shlomo asa 10 shulchanot. Moshe made 1 table, Shlomo did 10. Vayash shulchanot asara. It says it. He made 10 tables. This is quoting the pasuk in Divrei Yamim. Shulchan she'asa Moshe be'emtza, and the table that Moshe Rabbeinu made in the middle, was set in the middle. Chamesh mimino v'chamesh mismolo. And 5 on one side, 5 on the other side were the extra ones that Shlomo HaMelech made. Yachol yu makrivin al kulan. Is it possible that maybe they offered showbread on all of them? Talmud Lamar v'hashulchan asher alav lechem apanim zahav. But that's why the pasuk, if you recall, was in singular. There was only one shulchan that had the lechem apanim. Yachol lo hayu makrivin al kulam. Is it possible he never used them? Talmud Lamar bet hashulchanot v'aleim lechem apanim zahav. But the problem on that to say is because in Divrei Yamim it says the shulchanot, the tables, and on them was the lechem hapanim haketzad. How could you have both, only one, and on the other end talk about all of them having? Melamed shayu makrivim al kol achad ve'achad Shabbat achad. That each Shabbos they took a turn, and it was a rotation on which one of the shulchanot you would use. But doesn't it say in the Torah, referring to the mitzvah in Perek Yud Gimel of Sefer Dvarim, lo tosif alav lo tigra mimeno, that we're not allowed to add or subtract from mitzvot. Again, a talus with 5 tzitzis or a talus with 3 tzitzis. Ela kach hayta biyadam mesoret mipi Moshe. But rather, there was a tradition. This was halacha l'Moshe Sinai. It wasn't written, but it was a Masorah. Kishiyivnu beit avanim, that when they would finally build a permanent structure, the structure of stone, or the Beit HaMikdash, yubo eser shulchanot eser menorot asara kiorim, that there would be 10 of these various pieces, the 10 shulchanot, the 10 menorot, the 10 basins. And also, that's where it's coming from when it says that everything was from God. That's a quote from the pasuk in Divrei Yomim Aleph, Perek Chavchet. There is a tremendous amount of literature just on this issue, on how it's possible. The basis of the Medrash is also we find in a Braita and other sources as well. And the only way we can really explain that it wasn't a Baal Tosif is the fact that it came from a Masorah. It had to have been a Masorah from Moshe Rabbeinu. There is, interestingly, some other sources. The Balei HaTosfos actually find a source for it, that when it comes to both the menorah and the shulchan, the verb that's used in the Chumash back in Truma is te'aseh. Te'aseh, even though it's spelled Taf, Ayin, Sin, Hey, nevertheless it sounds as if it's spelled Taf, Yud, Ayin, Sin, Hey. And so the Balei HaTosfos will say that the sound, the Tzere, which has a Yud sound built into it, is already a remez that there are going to be 10 of them that are going to be constructed at a future point in time. And in fact, Rabbeinu Bechaye has the same piece. He says in the menorah, Tiv Te'aseh menorah b'Yud, u'lekach asa Shlomo esa menorot she'ena kavana shetitzaveh Torah menorah achat v'sheyavo Shlomo v'yaseh mehem eser. Because it doesn't make a sense that the Torah would say you do 1, and all of a sudden Shlomo would make 10. V'chein asara shulchanot v'asara kirim v'nitzah over al Baal Tosif. He would violate the Baal Tosif, the adding command. If he did 10 of that, and 10 of the menorahs, and 10 of the basins of Al Kadosh Baruch Hu, Modi'ah Moshe Bahar, Ki Kishiyivnu Beit Hamikdash, Yasu Asara V'Hayu Adrim Kabbalah B'Yadam Ad She'Higia Binyan Beit Hamikdash V'Yaseh Shlomo Kasher Hayta Kabbalah B'Yadam. But rather, it was something. It was a tradition they always had based on those words, and that's where you find them within it. It's a fascinating question that arises. It's something you can't ignore, and yet on the other hand, we know it happened, and we see from the next parak how happy God is. And so it had to have been, with the permission of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We're going to stop here, unless if there are any questions. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we will see each other, if not earlier than next week, at the very least next week at 9 o'clock. There's a lot of fun things that are going on in the shul on video. If you haven't had a chance to tune into them, I encourage you to always do so. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.